Oleszewski, and this is Ghost Ships, Gales, and Forgotten Tales. A guy named Alexander McDougall came up with an interesting idea back in the early 1880s for a new design of lake boat. Called it the Whaleback, and it revolutionized shipping for a while. Let's take a look at the Whalebacks. In the early 1880s, Captain Alexander McDougall began work on a concept he had been pondering for a long time. It was a steel-hulled towboat that would have low resistance to the seas. This is his original patent for the first whaleback. He called it Barge 101. To the wooden ship mariners of the day, Barge 101 looked like something from a Jules Verne outer space novel. He launched on June 23, 1888. The newfangled boat had a rounded deck and flush hatches. She also had no deck houses, just steel turrets with decks on top. Just over a year later, on July 17, 1889, McDougall launched Barge 102, a twin to 101. Less than 3 months later, Barge 103 was launched at Duluth. Note the hawse pipes in her snout, thus the name Pig Boat. In later years, those hawse pipes were replaced by hawse eyes on top of her snout. Barge 104 was launched on February 6, 1890, and whaleback building was picking up steam. However, when Barge 105 slid down the ways on June 9th of that same year, she would be the last whaleback barge launched at Duluth. The residents of Duluth were growing hostile toward the clamor of McDougall's shipbuilding, and so he moved over to the friendlier town of Superior, Wisconsin. Folks there were more than happy to have Captain McDougall and his growing legion of workers. Swiftly, they turned a large plot of swampland into a huge shipyard. While the crews were still working on digging the last slip, the shipwrights were assembling Barge 107, seen here. She launched on August 16, 1890. Next, McDougall would stick his thumb in the eye of the Duluth City Fathers. On November 15, 1890, he launched the steamer Joseph L. Colby at Superior. Then, just 33 minutes later, the yard launched Barge 109, and a citywide celebration took place. As time went on, the look of the whalebacks evolved. This is Barge 110 early in her career. Here she is seen just before being sold to saltwater service in 1907. Many of the whaleback barges were sold to service on salt water after the turn of the century. Seen here, Barge 111 did so in 1905. Barge 115 holds a dubious honor in Great Lakes shipwreck history. On December 18, 1899, she broke away from the Colgate Hoyt in a Lake Superior gale and grounded on Pick Island. Her crew survived, but Barge 115 became the last Great Lakes shipwreck of the 1800s. In order to compensate for the brutal weather at Superior, McDougall had huge barn-like shelters built over the launching ways. The sides were removable for whaleback launchings. Here we see Barge 116 inside one of those. In this series, we see the insides of Barge 117 during construction. It took just 2 months to build her. Here is her launch on November 14th, 1891. This postcard image of Barge 118 shows the unique whaleback hull lines. Hull number 122 was the first whaleback barge to get a name. She was christened Sagamore. She was the first of the whaleback barges to be constructed greater than 300 feet in length. Following her, Barge 126, however, was only 264 feet long. She went to salt water and was lost with all of her crew on New Year's Eve, 1905. Her twin, Barge 127, also went to salt water in 1905. She, however, led a very productive life as a tanker and ended her days in the scrapyard in 1936. Barge 129 was in tow of the steamer Mauna Loa on October 13, 1902. That was when the tow line parted. In high winds and waves, the steamer maneuvered to recover the barge. But in that effort, the two oreboats collided. The steamer's anchor tore a hole in the Whaleback, and she began to sink. As she sank, her crew managed to get aboard the steamer. Barge 129 rests in deep water about 35 miles northwest of Whitefish Point. Here we see barge number 130 being towed out of the Soo Locks by the steamer Simon J. Murphy. Notice just how low in the water a fully loaded whaleback rides. This is a close-up of barge 131. She's awaiting locking upbound. And we get a good look of life on a whaleback. I like this shot of barge 132 because it shows a detail of her rudder. Barge 133 went to salt water a bit later than her sisters. She left the lakes in April of 1911 and foundered with all hands in December. This image of barge 134 shows just how hard winter was aboard a whaleback. Here we see a unique image of barge 137 steaming at both ends. She's in tow of the steamer John Erickson. Note the steam coming from her forward mast. Launched on August 12, 1896, we have the queen of the whaleback barges. Hull 139 became the Alexander Holly. She was the last and the largest of all of the whaleback barges. At 377 feet in length, 46 feet in beam, and 22 feet in depth, she was one big barge. There were no other whaleback barges produced on the Great Lakes. Along with her sister barge 137, the Holly lasted until 1965, when both barges were scrapped. Look closely at these whaleback barges, and keep in mind that all of the crew accommodations were below decks. The turrets were simply stairways. Eating, sleeping, and relaxing were all done inside. There were no portholes in the hulls, so the only way for fresh air to come in was through the vents. Even with a crew of 5, it was a cramped place. Being a crewman on a whaleback barge had to be uncomfortable at best. Yet, it was probably better than working in the steel mill in the 1800s. So, the days of the steamers towing strings of whaleback barges are long gone. For sailors, that's probably a good thing.